All right, guys, in this video, we're going to take a look at completing the square. We're going to factor our polynomial equations by completing the square, and then we're going to solve for x to find all the solutions. Now, in the first video, we looked at some of the introductory steps. We kind of practiced the individual pieces along the way. In this one, we're going to put it all together. I'm going to move a little bit faster, just to kind of walk through one of these equations, kind of talk about some of the pitfalls, but hopefully you can kind of see how this process goes. And if you've done all the stuff in the first video, you should be in really good shape to complete the square effectively for this assignment. So now, for the DeltaMath ones, I'm only going to address the ones with a equals 1. There are other ones that pop up here, but I've set it up so you're only going to see the a equal 1 values. If you're dealing with anything that we'll talk about at the end. If a is not equal 1, what do you do? So, but that's not something I'm going to expect you to be able to do. So, so here we have x squared minus 2x plus 193 equals 0. So remember how we set this up. We set it up by going, okay, x squared minus 2x is equal to negative 193. I'm just going to go ahead and get the x's on one side, constants on the other side. The second thing we want to do is we're going to look at that b value, so that negative 2. We're going to divide it by 2 and square it. So negative 2 divided by 2 is equal to negative 1. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to negative 192. All right. So now at this point, I've got my square. I can complete my square here on left side, so I get x minus 1 squared is equal to negative 192. I'll take the square root of both sides. X minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 192. So one thing to notice, that 192, it is going to be an imaginary solution because I've got a negative in my radical. But also notice the 192, that's a pretty large number. We should probably check to see if we can simplify it. Now, if I think about my perfect squares, 4, 9, 16, 25, and I want to think about, can I factor any of those out? So I know I can factor out a 4, so let's go ahead and do that. So 192 divided by 4. I'm just going to keep this as positives, then we'll deal with the negatives when we get there. So that's equal to what? 4 goes in 4 times, goes in 48 times. Okay, well that's a really convenient number because 48 can also be divided by 4. So 48 divided by 4, that's going to get us 12. And 12 is a convenient number because that can also be divided by 4. And so I get 3. So I could rethink about the square root of negative 192 as being equal to the square root of negative 4 times 4 times 4 times 3. Now I know that 4 times the square root of 4 is 2. I've got 3 sets of those, so it's 2 times 2 times 2. So this is the same as plus or minus 8 square root of negative 3. So I've got x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 8 root negative 3. So let's go ahead and solve this. I get x, let's add 1 to both sides, is equal to 1 plus or minus 8. And then root negative 3, we'll say is root 3i. Okay, so we're going to put the I at the end here, but it's 8 root 3i. So do be on the lookout. One of the things that makes this a little bit tricky is you do need to be able to reduce your radicals. So let's go ahead and check and see if we got this correct or not. All right, so I've got 1 is equal to, or I'm sorry, 1 plus or minus 8 root 3 I. And make sure that I is not on the inside of your radical. It should be on the outside of your radical. If you need to, hit the right arrow just to get out of your radical there. So let's go ahead and check this. And there we go. There's our solution. Now it will count it wrong if you don't reduce. Notice here they factored out 64. If you could see that 64 divided into 192 3 times, good for you. I usually just start with my smaller numbers and work my way up from there. So hopefully this is helpful. You can see how we just kind of take the steps, but also you can look at how they did this. You can also mirror this step. It's the same process for all of them. Sometimes you'll get imaginary numbers, sometimes you'll get radicals, sometimes you'll even get some like whole numbers that work out really nicely, some integers. So anyways, let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to reach out. But this wraps up my video on completing the square here in DeltaMath. Oh, one last thing. Almost forgot. I mentioned, what do you do if you get an a value that's not equal to 2? Well, let's go ahead and find one here. So let's look at something like this. What would I do? Well, I would take this -6 and I would divide it out all 3 terms, okay? So in this case, I would rewrite this as x squared minus 2x, and then -210 divided by 6, that's going to be 35. -35 is equal to 0. So notice I divided this side by -6, and since it's 0 on the other side, I can divide that by -6, and then I would go ahead and solve from there. So this actually, completing the square this way, the reason that I've not had students do this, at least just for this kind of practice in completing the square, is because sometimes these values turn into fractions. You end up like with 5/6 or something, and then you have to divide that by 2, and then you square it, so then you're at like 5/12 squared, which is 25 over 144, and then you're adding that to both sides, and it just becomes like really messy. Now, that is an important skill to be able to do, but as far as this video is more like a let's get used to completing the square, that's the reason why I've kind of excluded that. So you can complete the square when the a value is not 1. It can just get really nasty with fractions and radicals of fractions and things like that, that are everybody's favorite thing to deal with. So anyways, if you run into some a values that are not equal to 1, that's how you would go ahead and deal with it. Hopefully DeltaMath is kind and doesn't give you too many crazy fractions if you run into any. So this now wraps up the video on completing the square. Again, feel free to reach out if you have any questions.